We've just added the question struct to our project and replaced the quiz array with our sample questions. There's only one problem, because the debug area, which is giving us feedback about whether if we got the questions right or wrong, can only be seen by us, the developers. We need to somehow relay this information to the user in the app. Instead of using our print statements here, we had to think of another method. So let's go ahead and delete these. And instead, we're going to set the background color of the button that the user pressed either green or red, depending on whether if they got the right answer. We can get hold of the button that they pressed by simply tapping into the sender object, and we can say sender.background color property, change that to equal UI color.green if they have gotten it right. Otherwise, we're going to change the sender's background color to UI color.red. And these UI colors are sort of pre-built colors that come with the iOS palette. So you can write simply just a dot and scroll down to see all of the different colors that you can choose from. But we're going to stick with just green and red for now. Now, if we run our app, you can see that it sort of works, because when I select true, you can see that the true button that I selected gets highlighted with the color that reflects whether if I got the question right or wrong, but it doesn't go away. So I end up with something that doesn't really make much sense. So we need to make the color change back to clear as soon as we go to the next question. So where does that happen? Well, inside our update UI, of course. So right below this line, we're going to add some more code to our update UI to make it take our true button. So that, of course, comes from the IB outlet that we set up earlier on, the true and false button up here. And we're going to set its background color to UI color.clear. And we're going to do the same with the false button as well. So that way we reset all the button's background color every time we go to the next question. So let's run our app again. Now we have a new problem. Why is it that our color's not showing up at all anymore? Well, try and use the 5-step debug process and see if you can figure it out. Pause the video and I'll wait for you. All right, did you manage to figure it out? Our expectation is when we hit this line, if the user got it right, the color should change to green, and if the user got it wrong, it should change to red. Whereas in reality, it's not changing at all. So what's going on? Well, we know that we've got this part which changes the background color back to clear, and that happens pretty much almost immediately after this. So that means even though the background color does get changed, it happens in such a short period of time because it takes no time at all to get through these few lines of code that we don't even see it. Here's a challenge for you. Now here I've got the code from my egg timer project open in front of me. And this line of code, well, even though it's on 2 lines, it's just because my font size is massive so that you'll be able to see what's going on. But we use this line of code to create a timer. And the timer would be triggered after 1 second. And once that time interval is up, it calls a method inside the selector. So whatever we put in here. I want you to take a look at this line of code and have a think about how you might be able to adapt it to implement a 0.2 second delay. The delay should happen between changing the background color to green or red and resetting it back to clear. All going well, this is the effect that you should observe when you run the app. It changes the color for 0.2 seconds and then it changes back to clear. Pause the video and try to complete the challenge. All right, so essentially what we need is a bit of a time delay before this method gets triggered. So instead of directly calling update UI, I'm going to write out the code for my timer right here. Now, the timer is currently set to have a time interval of 1 second. So I'm going to change that to 0.2 seconds. And then the selector, which is the method that it calls once the time is up, is called update timer, which comes from our egg timer. But instead, I'm going to make it call update UI. And I'm going to delete this method call right here. Finally, we don't actually need this timer to repeat at all, so we can change this to false. We only need it to run once, wait for 0.2 seconds, and then call update UI, and then that's it. It can end. It doesn't need to continue. So we don't actually need to store it inside a variable because we don't need to invalidate it if it only runs once. If it's a timer that repeats, then we should probably stop it so that it doesn't continue on in the background. But in this case, because it's a timer that just runs once and then stops, we don't actually need to store it inside any sort of variable. Now, the only last thing we have to fix is, of course, selector relies on Objective-C. So we have to add the Objective-C annotation in front of our update UI function. Now, if we run our app, it's now working exactly as we would expect it to. It would change the color for 0.2 seconds and then it would go to clear. Now, all that remains is to set up our progress bar. At the moment, we've already got our progress bar linked to our view controller through an outlet called progress bar. So I want you to use what you've learned from the previous lesson about progress bars to make it display our progress through our quiz. So you know that you can get hold of how many items there are in the quiz array, and you also have this variable that keeps track of where you are in the quiz, which question you're on. Now here's a hint, it only takes one line of code. But by the end, you should end up with an app that starts out with a fraction of progress. And as we answer more questions, the progress bar completes until we get to the last question where the entire progress bar is full. And then when we circle back to the first question again, it resets. So have a think about how to solve this and try to remember how we used the progress bar previously. So pause the video and try to complete that challenge. All right, so the logical place to update our user interface, namely our progress bar, is of course also inside our update UI function. Just below the previous line of code, I'm going to tap into my progress bar, which of course comes from my IB outlet here, which is linked to my UI progress view. And then I'm going to change its progress property, which of course expects a floating point number between 0 and 1 to represent the progress of the bar. So in order to calculate this progress of where the user is, I'm going to take the current question number, so which question they're on, and then divide it by the total number of questions in the quiz array. To do that, I'm going to write question number divided by quiz.count. So now that would work, other than the fact that, of course, we need a floating point number for our progress. And remember that we shouldn't get tripped up by floats. We can't simply wrap everything inside a float. We have to change each of these integers or these whole numbers into a floating point number first before we carry out the division. So in exactly the same way that we did in the egg timer. Now, if we run our app as it is, you'll notice that it doesn't behave the same way as what I showed you. It starts out being completely blank, but once we reach to the last question, the one about chocolate and dogs, it actually doesn't get to the end. And in fact, the next thing that happens if I press the button is it resets back to the first question, and we never get the wonderful sense of completion. In order to solve that, we of course know that question number starts from 0. So 0 divided by anything is going to be 0. So instead, we want to add 1 to question number so that in the very beginning, we already get a little bit of progress to represent that we're currently in the middle of question 1. So did you manage to get that right? If not, be sure to review the lessons in the last module where we explored progress bar, progress, and floating point conversion in detail. But in the next lesson, we're going to talk more about mobile design patterns and the model view controller. So for all of that and more, I'll see you there.